Welcome everybody to the Depths of Motherhood podcast. This is a special season dedicated to the tribe of the mother. But also I know any mothers listening will find this extremely valuable. I've created each episode to offer simple, digestible, and supportive information, which I hope will educate and inspire anyone who listens. So this is by popular demand. Please help us to educate and support the tribe holding the mother. Look forward to passionate and highly knowledgeable guests dedicated to reclaiming the essence of birth and embracing conscious parenting. Throughout our time together, our guests will serve as the guiding voices, illuminating the path towards a deeper understanding of preconception, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. This is with the mother and the baby being the center of the exploration. In the show notes, you'll discover the link to Nourished Mother package, which will offer many different resources to complement each episode. This is free for all members in the Women's Circle, or £33 for everybody who just wants to purchase the package. A heartfelt thank you to our incredible guests and immense gratitude to my partner for supporting me on this creation. And finally, last but not least, special thank you to Araya, my daughter, for being the endless well of inspiration. Welcome back, everybody. Today we have Maryn Green joining us on the show. Maryn is the co-founder of Indie Birth alongside Margot Blackstone, and actually all of us, including the original co-host of the Depths of Motherhood podcast, Angelica, all four of us recorded one of the first episodes for this podcast almost 3 years ago, which is crazy. So I will leave the link in the show notes for that. Maryn trained as a midwife, which began as a 4-year apprenticeship and then eventually went on to her serving in the role of licensed midwife in Arizona. I found Indie Birth through listening to Maryn's podcast, Taking Back Birth, which I was just listening to constantly through my pregnancy. And I was so amazed, so shocked, so excited to be receiving this information. And the creation of Indie Birth is to support women in reclaiming their innate wisdom and authority when it comes to pregnancy, postpartum, motherhood in general. They are challenging the norms and breaking down walls of outdated paradigms with the intention to return birth to its rightful place, an act of sovereignty, connection, and deep spiritual transformation. Indie Birth have created this space which blends ancient practices, radical midwifery, and grounded spirituality to offer a holistic path for those who know that birth is not a medical event. So if you go to their website, you can find information on the podcast, on their doula training, their midwifery school, and also one-on-one coaching. This conversation is creating a space to explore the complexities of pregnancy and childbirth, and with a simple yet powerful tool of somatic experiencing, which is being able to go inside of your body to listen to her and receive messages so that you can make choices that will best serve you. Because we are constantly being bombarded with ideas and beliefs of how we should be pregnant, give birth, and heal in the postpartum. If we can come back into our body to find the answers or find the questions to ask and notice if they align with our heart, with our truth, with what our body is truly calling for. And Maryn shared that she's actually going deeper into somatic work, somatic therapy. She can see how important this is, not only for the women giving birth, but for the support team as well, to be able to create a space where the mother feels that she is held and there is as little interference as possible. That takes a lot of strength from the person holding space, not to be constantly moved by emotions and fears that arise when the mother is in labor. I go through the questions that the Depths of Motherhood community put forward. And the questions range from, how can I show up as a partner? How can I create the space that feels safe for the mother? How can I hold space for my own emotions so that I can show up? And we also talk about what to do if the people who are giving us support, the birth team, if it seems that they are not listening, that they cannot hear what we're saying, I go on to talk about this primal instinct when giving birth, when we can let all of our walls down and just let ourselves be free to birth the way that our body is wanting to birth. And right at the end of this conversation, we start to bring in the baby coming through, seeing the birth as an experience of the mother and the baby. I absolutely loved this conversation, so I hope that you do too. Before we jump in, I would like to invite you to our women's circle that is happening on the 27th of October, where we will be doing a group womb massage and a water of the womb meditation. This is by donation, pay as little or as much as you want. The link will be in the show notes. If you can't make the live, I'll send out the recording to everyone that has signed up. Let's take a deep breath in and allow that breath to seep into all of our cells, all the way down to our toes, to our fingers. Let the breath bring the softness and gentle movement to the body. And as you exhale, just notice if you can release any unnecessary tension in the body. Maybe just noticing where the inhale breath reaches to and the areas that soften when you exhale.
All right. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. It is a pleasure to sit with you again. I was just saying it's been 2.5 years since last time when we sat down together, which is wild. Would you like to share with the listeners what you've been up to in 2.5 years since we last spoke? I know you have a new project and so much. So please let us know what's been happening in your world.
Oh,
Like
wow.
where
Thank
to
you.
start? 2.5
I
years.
know. Well, not only that, but it's like, what is time? It's like, I know that it's been that long. And when you have a baby like you do, I mean, I do too, but like to see how a child grows in that amount of time, I feel like it makes more sense. So for me, in my mind, I'm like 2.5 years ago, what was going on for me? Hmm. I was probably living in Kentucky then. So we had moved from Arizona to Kentucky. And in the years since, I just attended a lot of births there. It felt really good to start to shift things in that birth community. I feel like maybe that's why I was brought there for even a short amount of time. So, met some really amazing women, students, and friends that are still close. And yeah, saw breech births and twin births and supported all kinds of beautiful women through that threshold. It was a quite profound experience that I'll keep as a short story right now. But the last birth I was due to attend in Kentucky before we came here to Hawaii, which we had planned for many months. We had kind of planned to like have a vacation or permanent vacation. But the last birth I attended was really quite terrible. It was really life changing personally, not so much the outcome of the birth. I mean, the outcome was fine. The birth itself was just really intense. And I had never experienced people I worked with placing blame on me or trying to. And it was just a really uncomfortable and emotional experience for me. So I'm pretty open about all things. And I was very happy to have the universe segue me to a new beautiful place at that particular time. So we've been here in Hawaii for the last 8 months, and I'm not really attending births. I'm doing more virtual, like virtual prenatals and that kind of thing, and lots of indie birth stuff. So that's kind of the short version.
Wow, thank you for sharing. So much has happened, and I'm just feeling into that story as well. And I really admire your vulnerability to share these things. I think it's really important because it's part of our human experience as well, and to see what paths then we go on. What was the inspiration for the new project that you started?
Yeah, I had started a woman's circle, a virtual mama's circle online last summer. And that's called Magical Mama. And it's been great. I mean, the same women are in it. So, we meet a couple times a month. It's been a really beautiful project. To be honest, I'm not sure where that will take me once this year. So, come August, what I'll do with that, kind of, where that will lead to or what that will turn into, I'm really not sure. Probably the newer project is just focusing on somatic work. So, after this birth that I mentioned, I was just really devastated, Danielle. Like, it was really intense for my body as well to experience just all of it, like all of it, the uncertainty of the condition this baby was in, like there was a lot to the story. But again, mostly that these parents who were so dear to me, who I considered really great friends as well, completely just stopped talking to me and completely turned and were quite nasty, actually. So out of that came this discovery of somatic work and somatic experiencing in particular. I mean, there's lots of people and places teaching, but that's where I've landed for now, with some really great teachers. And I'm pursuing that certification. So, to be a somatic experiencing practitioner at some point in the next 3 years. And while I'm learning, I'm just integrating that into my own life more and into the circles and into the indie birth world and into the midwifery school and having some offerings around connecting with our bodies, especially for birth workers. I just didn't realize how much my nervous system needed attention. And I think that's a pretty common thread around the world for midwives, for home birth midwives in particular. And I think even for doulas, there's a lot of cultural conditioning that plays in to the way that we offer our services to the world. I don't regret any of the things that have happened or that I've experienced, but I'm so grateful that it has led me to more understanding of myself.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. And I really resonate with what you're saying about getting into the body because there is so much information online. Like we're getting it from all angles, and there is compelling arguments and evidence and information about all sides. And so it's like, how can we get back into our body to feel the things that are arising too? Because I feel like one of the most courageous acts is how well we can be with the things that are uncomfortable inside of us. And I'm sure that this experience has led you to that point of being like, how can I hold space for that? And also noticing how what our patterns are of when things come up, because I know like mine is to run away, and I noticed that in my own birth as well. It was like,
Hmm.
I don't want to do this anymore, can someone take it away from me? So if you
Mhm.
can like get to that before and see what's lingering inside, and I think it's such a beautiful piece to bring into the work that you're doing. So I'm sorry that like this experience came, and also at the same time I'm sure that it's going to bring so much wisdom through you to the people that are connecting with you, and they'll. So let's get into these questions then, because there has been many questions come through that people want me to ask you, because they know how passionate you are about birth. And so the first question that I'm going to ask is this. I'll ask as though I'm saying, I'm afraid of not being at the hospital, but my loved one wants a home birth. How can I overcome any fears and provide the best support in this setting? So they're afraid of doing the home birth. They want to be at the hospital, but their
So the
partner wants to,
partner, the
the
partner
part,
wants to be at the
yeah, the
hospital?
mother wants to be at home. This was from one of the dads.
Mhm. Hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting because that actually turned out to be an unconscious theme in this birth that really rocked my world. The dad wasn't as supportive internally as it had appeared that he was. And without making too many assumptions, in hindsight, I can see that he held a lot of trauma around his own birth experience, what he had heard about birth, just the cultural programming. So I think that's a great place to start for partners. Like, assuming you have time in your pregnancy, it's almost like you treat it as if it's not actually about your pregnancy yet. It's actually about you. And it's actually about what's living inside of you in regards to birth. And like I shared, most people have had traumatic births themselves as babies. Most of us came into the world in that way. So if we can find those places and maybe have support in doing so and feel into them and even be aware that that might be true, then we start to unravel our fears. And our fears, of course, aren't our true selves, right? So who knows what this partner actually believes, what he might actually want, but it's impossible to know when you haven't seen the truth of your situation. And I actually have a podcast on that somewhere. I think it's called the one about getting your partner on board with a home birth. So that's a free listen for anybody that is in that situation. It's probably a pretty long podcast, but if I remember correctly, just summing up in a sense, that it is a relationship issue, something like this that comes up. It's not often like, oh, we just believe different things. It's each person working on their own shit, and then the relationship being in a place where these conversations can happen and healing can happen and true support can happen. So that person is not alone at all in that.
I had done all the mental work, and I knew what was happening physiologically, and I knew what I would do. But then when I was giving birth, it was like this whole other world, and I lost that part of my brain. And there was a part where I was the one, and I was hearing my grandma's voice saying, "You have to go to hospital." And because even though she had 3 home births, she told me, because I was talking with my mum, my grandma, seeing what their history was, trying to do this deeper work. And my grandma was telling me this. And instead of feeling into it in that moment, I kind of dismissed it. And I was like, oh, isn't it just so bad how she's been brainwashed, even though she's given birth 3 times at home and it was fine? And so instead of like sitting with that, I dismissed it. And I saw that on the other side because I could hear a voice coming through that lives within me. And so it was my partner who was looking at me like, you've got this, you can do this. And I was not convinced at all. We actually ended up going to hospital. But sometimes you just don't see until you've broken it open. But I do feel that there is that way of the curiosity beforehand and having that space to go to them places and be curious. And if you don't have words for it, if you don't have memories, you can usually feel it inside of your body, right? You can feel where that resonates. So thank you so much for sharing that. And whatever you say about your podcast, whichever episode, I'll put it in the links below. So just go to the show notes and I'll put that episode in.
All right,
I know
thank
you were the
you.
one that I listened to the whole way through my pregnancy. So I was like, yeah, everyone go. I recommend you highly. All right. Number 2, how can I help prepare the space for a home birth to ensure it's safe and comfortable?
Hmm. That's the beauty of home birth, right? Is that we get to be in our own space and we get to think about what feels good to us. I love that. I think because it's a question that, I could answer easily and also more in depth. I always pick the in depth answer. And I think it starts with turning inward again, finding that sense of safety in ourselves, which again might take years, but it's never too early. It's never too late to start that, to just feel what's going on in your body and feel the places, like you said, that are scared or unsure and just be with them. And then turning to the other places, even if they're so tiny in our body. I always say, like, even if it's just your little finger, if that's the only place that feels safe and grounded to you, then just be with that and allow your body to speak to you, allow your body to expand that feeling as it's ready without forcing, and cultivate that inner sense of safety because that's most important ultimately. And that's how we maintain our feeling of powerfulness in a birth, right? You went to the hospital. That wasn't your plan. I went to the hospital with my last birth. That wasn't the plan. So we don't always control our environment as much as we would love to. That's just not birth. So I think the best place is to cultivate that safe cozy feeling inside. And chances are that it will be reflected in your environment. It's really hard to make something on the outside feel safer than we do on the inside.
I love that. And there was a point that I remember so clearly where the candles and everything, they took me so far. And then there's a point of just this transition, it's a deep dive inside. This is a beautiful practice, as you mentioned, to find that place beforehand where you can go to, and it's like your safe space, like that one island inside of you, even if it is your little finger, and you just focus and be with that. I noticed in myself, I did a closing of the bones ceremony, and I hate being tied up, like wrapped up and like not being able to move.
Mm.
And the only place that I could feel safe was feeling the back of my throat as the air came in. And there's one point, and that's exactly the same point that I remember when I was in transition, that I was feeling into. It kept drawing me in to feel that point. But if I lost it, then it was like, whoa, I'm like somewhere else in the universe right now.
Mm.
So that's a really beautiful thing to bring in. Thank you for sharing that. All right.
Yeah.
Number 3. Okay, this is a good one. They're all good ones, but how can I hold space and actively support my loved one during the home birth or during birth without becoming a distraction or a source of anxiety?
That's a very thoughtful question. I love it. I love teaching about physiological birth, and I think it's really pretty simplified information in a sense. You can get all sciency about the way the uterus contracts and all of these more in detailed concepts. But for people that are going to be supporting a birth, whether they're the partner, the grandma, whoever, I really love when I can share with them how birth actually works in the body, in the mammal body, just so that they understand that less is more, and doing often interferes with this beautiful flow that the body has. Most people don't have this information. Most birthing women don't have this information. So, to understand how the hormones work and the fact that a birthing woman usually needs to feel safe, protected, and loved. Darkness is really key. Taking her out of her brain where she's, going to get this baby in the stars can actually be dangerous. So, no one needs to be afraid of that. It's just if we're talking to a woman in labor, even if we think we're saying something that might be helpful, my experience has been as a midwife that less is always more. That very rarely, are words really all that helpful? Sometimes they are. Sometimes we do need to ask a birthing woman, what she wants. But as far as support, if you're there to make sure she's comfortable, making sure she has food and drink, then learning how to not disturb the process, which really is managing your own energy as well.
Big shout out to our sponsor, Evolving Humans, who are the pioneers for energy healing. This practice that I was taught 4 years ago has been studied by researchers all around the world to provide evidence of the physiological effects of energy healing. And I'm not just saying this because it's a promotion, but I have used this practice every single day for 4 years, and personally I've noticed the most impact in my emotional state. This energy practice taught me how to feel energy in my body and observe the sensations. The technique involves you using your hand and connecting to the energy field within your body. And with this gentle, loving awareness that you bring to the table, everything is seen and lived. The whole being comes into alignment. During the birth of my daughter, I tore, and the discomfort that I was experiencing with this tear started to ease up dramatically when I would use this technique. In the show notes, you'll find the link to Evolving Humans so that you can explore this healing technique, which is available through a course that you can join today.
So, not bringing your own fears or anxiety into the room, because a birthing woman can always feel that, even if it's not spoken. And with something like food or drink, just knowing that you can offer that to her without words. You can rely on body communication. And you should take care of yourself. Anybody that's attending births needs to take care of their own needs. So you have to go to the bathroom, you have to eat food. Sometimes sleep is difficult for everybody, but just taking really good care of yourself enables you to show up in a way that usually feels really good to the woman that's birthing if you're close to her.
That's beautiful. It's like the ultimate space holder, being able to notice what's happening inside of you, but hold that space. And I can't remember where I read this or heard it. Maybe it was on your podcast. I don't know. But it was talking about like the eye contact that the midwife or the doula gives. And it's like she sits there, she's holding the space, and the mother will look in their eyes and see that there is this like, okay, there's a softness, everything's okay. And it's like the mother can go to them eyes to know if there's is anything that is coming up for her. So how much the mother will anchor in on that person who is holding the space. It is such a, wow, it's such an honor and such a powerful role to be in. And I think if for people who are just having their family around, maybe they don't have a doula or a midwife for whatever reason, or it's just happening spontaneously at home, it's like doing that work to connect more deeply in them spaces where the physical, like where the mind starts to melt and you just want to be held and seen and supported and loved, all of them words. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. I'm getting goosebumps. I think I'm getting broody or something. I don't know what's happening.
I love it. Well, they're such passionate topics for us both. I feel the same.
Yes, yes, yes. And I also loved how you said about the physiological, because this is the both sides of it, isn't it? It's like the balance of it. Because if my partner was so like he had all the education from what I was telling him, and obviously I don't know everything, but I knew a bit of what was happening. And so when I started to be screaming and in pain, he knew like you're probably in
Exactly.
transition and you're going to be like there anytime soon, but he couldn't convince me enough. So
Exactly. That's such a great example, and I've of course seen it the other way too, where the partner really isn't as educated as would be nice. And I don't mean that someone has to study for hours and hours. It's just know what's normal, know what
hmm
birth looks like. Watch a couple birth videos, feel your uncomfortableness, see that
yeah.
there's blood, like acclimate yourself to the fact that this is a raw human event and you're probably going to see raw human things. But with some of the dads that maybe didn't do that over the years, they definitely bring a fear, and they definitely bring an anxiety because it's really hard to see the person you love, and I put it in quotes, in pain. Sometimes it's pain. I mean, sometimes it's just intensity for that woman.
Did you
But
see them balloons
seeing,
come up on the screen then? Or was this just
well,
me?
yeah, what was up with that?
I don't
I
know. I
thought you
didn't
did
do it.
that.
No, I don't even know what just happened.
Oh God, the AI is like reacting to what we're
Oh my
saying
God.
or something. I don't
So
know.
weird. Really
Okay.
creepy.
Very weird. Okay. Thanks, Zoom, for the balloons. I appreciate them.
Yeah, they're
If you're
like, you go
listening,
you, you're doing great. Anyway,
that is weird.
now where were we?
Oh, partners. Oh, I
Partners
don't
and all
know.
that.
Lots of
Oh,
topics.
my daughter is so fascinated by birth. She always wants to see videos. So I usually go to yours because I know that you've got videos up there. She wants to see the baby coming out and now she wants to see animals. Watching animals give birth is interesting too because you can really see the
Yeah.
contractions happening and how they move and the positions they get into. And it's wow, we were watching snake births, gorilla birth, like all of it yesterday.
Oh, wow. I love that. I should watch more with my kids. I don't think I've seen a snake birth.
Oh,
That's
they're
cool.
pretty. It's interesting. If you like snakes, it's probably great, but I'm not like 100% a fan. So bit slimy
Yeah,
for me.
me either.
All right, let's see what else is in here. Okay, so is there anything I should be aware of that might be surprising or shocking during the birth? And what can I do to stay calm and focused?
Well, there is a lot that's surprising about birth, even if we've studied it, even if we've had, 9 babies before. So maybe it's being uncomfortable with something that feels surprising, and we can practice that as well. Many of us, we have memories or stories around being caught off guard and how that feels to our bodies. and we just don't control birth. So I don't think every birth always feels surprising, but that's easy for me to say if I'm just witnessing. I think for a lot of moms, there are things they didn't expect, and there's only so much you can know about it all. The second part of that question, I really love as well, because I think we can even sit with this idea or expectation that we need to be calm in birth. I don't know if that's true. For some women, that might feel true. They might really resonate with that. And maybe they've had births where they were just as cool as a cucumber. But in attending a lot of births, I can share with you that most women, especially if they haven't birthed before and it's all new to them, they get to a point in the birth process where it's about letting go. It's not about being calm. It's not about keeping it together. It's actually about letting yourself go. And that might mean screaming. That might mean growling. That might mean actually feeling like you're going to die, to be honest. There's a point at which keeping it all together keeps the baby in. So that is something to sit with. That might not be everybody's experience, but you can tuck these words in the back of your mind. And if you're in the middle of your birth, maybe that will help you, because holding on too tightly isn't always what birth requires of us. And I think it's unfortunate in some ways that has come to be the expectation of some. And, I think we could point to lots of places, even methods around birth. I won't name any of them that really seek to keep women quiet and under control. And again, for some personalities, that feels right. I've seen it with my own eyes. But for a lot of personalities, it makes them feel like they're just crazy wild animals, and they feel maybe even embarrassed or ashamed after the birth, like, oh my God, I really lost it. That was not how I wanted this to look. But we live in a culture where most women are still birthing voluntarily in the hospital. And in the hospital setting, it's about keeping quiet. How is it going to work if every single woman in the hospital is growling her baby out, right? So a lot of these methods have come into play to keep women as these pretty good girls, and I can just birth a baby with a breath and no sound at all. So you got to figure out what's true for you, but sometimes I think women enjoy the permission to let go of that. It doesn't need to be calm.
Oof, I wish I would have heard this before. I definitely like saw the good girl syndrome for sure. Because when it was like,
You want to do it right.
yeah, I'm like, oh, I've seen the videos. Are just like, okay, I can literally remember my mind going, right, I'm gonna squat down now and I'm gonna just give birth. Like I've done 22 hours, I'm done. Okay, I'll squat down. She's not coming. Why is she not coming though? And then I'm like, oh no, like I'm feeling this energy coming through. I want to scream. I screamed. And then I remember my partner looking at me like, we haven't talked about this. Is this like normal? And because I had houses around me, I started to think, oh my
Yep.
gosh, they can hear me. I'm
I
screaming. I'm like
know.
disrupting the peace. But then when I got to the hospital, I remember I was screaming, and the doctor looked at me and said, you're going to have to stop screaming, or your baby is not going to get any oxygen. And I looked at his balls and I'm like, I swear to God, because he was Spanish, so he didn't understand what I was saying. But I said to him, I'm like, if he says that one more time, I'm going to punch him right in the balls. And I can remember
Yeah.
so clearly I can remember his trousers and the shape of his like penis and balls in them. And I was like, I am going to punch them like so hard. But luckily for him, like Araya came out like in the next breath. So I was like, you're lucky. And I'm lucky. I'm probably in prison or something.
Well, I mean, it's a normal reaction. And I think, to throw into the mix too, that birth is highly sexual, and that's super
Mm,
uncomfortable to most people. So even for our partners sometimes, to be like, oh wow, like I've heard those noises before, but it was in a
mm.
different context. And even my kids have laughed about the noises that I've made having babies. Like kids think it's hilarious and they think it's funny. And, again, there's this degree of uncomfortableness just in our culture about us being raw, about us being
Mm,
sexual. So I think
yes.
that's the part we have to be with. And, being surrounded by people that we feel safe with, of course, is really helpful. But I remember with my first home birth, so my second baby, but my first home birth, I screamed for hours. It was actually a little bit painful. He came out with his hand like next to his face,
Mm.
which is a different sensation. And all the windows were open. It was in the city in September. It was a really warm day. And I remember having that same thought, like I was kind of embarrassed. And the next day, the neighbors, who I don't think they even spoke English, they were like these cute little Vietnamese women, and they somehow communicated that they heard me having a baby. And it was kind of cute, but also I was left with those feelings for a little bit about feeling a little ashamed, like I had done it wrong or I had been like too much. And it was only when I started attending births that I got to see that that was actually really normal. And, most people aren't attending births, they don't know that that's normal, but it really is.
Yeah, I think the only birth I'd seen was in a movie. So, like, sometimes they are actually very loud and screaming, but it was a different thing
It's
that I
that
was
out of
experiencing. Yes. And I had something in the back of my mind because my friend said to me, when I gave birth to my twins, I sounded like a cow. So I actually brought that up through the birth and I was like, I want to try and sound like a cow, you know? So it was still, there was that control there of like, someone else has done that, so I can do it instead of like fully letting myself feel what that authentic expression wanted to be at the time. But I also think this is just like the beautiful path of getting to know ourselves more deeply. Even though I felt shame and embarrassment of going to the hospital for so long, now I just feel like we needed that. It was so painful for me. Like it broke me open and it broke me to see things that were inside. I can go back and say, what, there are some things that I wish I knew. I wish I did let a midwife or a doula in, but I went through the trauma response of running away from everyone. As the time got closer, I was like, oh no, I don't need midwife anymore or a doula. Okay, goodbye. So it's very interesting
Sure.
on the other side. And that's the only time you might get to see it is on the other side, right? What should we do if the midwife or doula insists on something that we specifically said we didn't want to do? So they've got a birth plan, so they didn't want to do it, but the midwife or doula is saying, we have to do this. What is your take on that? And how can we effectively communicate what we've spoke about in the birth plan?
Right. It depends on maybe the system one is in, meaning that if you're working with a midwife in the hospital and they're just somebody that you hired, maybe they're not a great personal match, perhaps, right? Like maybe they're not totally attuned to your desires, your wishes. And that's a more difficult situation, obviously, because if we don't have trust with the people that are going to be there for us, then how can we know that anything they say is true? And that's sort of the major problem in the world around maternity care is that most women are being cared for by somebody that ultimately doesn't have their interests at heart. They probably have their license at heart or their commitment to the hospital or their insurance or their malpractice or something like that. I think if you can find someone out of the system that doesn't have those loyalties, you'll probably have a better chance of a trusting relationship. And I have not really encountered that in my time as a midwife. Like, I already know them, they already know me, they know kind of what I believe, I know what their vision is. And so, if something came up that was truly an emergency, there's usually trust there for me to just help in the ways that I've been trained to help. If you're not in that situation, I guess my best piece of advice would be to give yourself time, assuming it's not an emergency. If someone suggests something or says they need to do something, is
Mhm.
always just to say, we need a few minutes
Mhm.
and, get yourself together, talk with your partner, maybe bring in other consult, but just don't rush into choices that other people feel you need. And sometimes that's even in the face of a C-section or something. Sometimes things do happen quickly. Usually you can afford a minute to say, hey, just give us some space here. And if you
Mhm.
don't feel like you can afford that minute, then maybe there is something that needs to be addressed.
Mhm.
It's really hard to say.
Oh, that's great advice. And I feel for people who are on this journey of really stepping into this fully and presently and like consciously choosing their tribe, who's around them. It's like feeling into who you're going to have in that space. And if something comes up where, beforehand, before you give birth, when you're meeting with your doula or midwife, something doesn't feel comfortable, but you can't quite put your finger on it. Again, going
Yes,
back to
yes,
somatic practices, right? And feeling like, where is that in my body? What is that? Is it my thing, or is it something that they're saying that
yes.
it doesn't quite align? And yeah, I think getting
I love that.
courageous enough, right? Because I think one of the things that I've noticed in myself is I just couldn't step into the courage for asking what I wanted or even questioning somebody. But this is like the time beforehand to get into that. And yeah, being uncomfortable, like you said, like let's get comfortable with being uncomfortable and asking these questions or
Mm-hmm.
saying what we need, because it's so deeply ingrained just to go with what someone else is telling us to do and putting our feelings to the back. But they come
Mm-hmm.
out, they surface in some way. So it's like getting to that point beforehand.
Most people have many months in a pregnancy with this care provider to do that kind of experimenting. Certainly, there's things in the pregnancy that come up as well, different tests or different options. And I agree, that's the time to, even if it's hard, speak your mind, address the things within us that cause us to want to people please or to not want to speak up, because those are just really amazing growth opportunities as well in pregnancy.
Yeah. And after the baby's born, I'm noticing now, like Arise 3, I'm having to have these practice this conscious communication to make sure that, her needs are met, or if there's something uncomfortable with whatever other families, it's like, how can we communicate this without running away or gossiping and just coming together as human beings, saying how we feel and learning how to take responsibility for what we're saying. So yeah, big one, conscious communication, eh? That mixed with
Yes.
somatics is like,
Yeah, and I think also the other one being the way we were parented, the way we were mothering, and our own attachment
mm,
wounds and what we felt as children growing up, likely to pass those things on unless we're really conscious. And I think we are in a time of such conscious parenting and conscious mothering. More and more women are coming to that place where we decide not to do things the same. The other piece, these amazing souls coming in as babies require us to do better and work on the ancestral line. And they are doing that work too.
I'm really glad you brought up that actually, because I had this wonderful conversation with somebody who works with spirit babies, and she offered to give me this regression practice. She'd listened to my birth story, and I had some concerns that Araya had picked up some trauma along the way. And what she said to me was she was like, hold my daughter. She told me to hold her and just feel into, like, do I really believe that, or am I projecting
Right.
this onto her? And it was interesting because I realized that I was projecting this story just because I found it traumatic, but actually
Right.
I
Right.
don't think she did. And she said
Right.
she
I love
saw
that.
that. She said she didn't pick it up. But when I was coming through, she said you like scooped it all through. Like you came out of the vagina and you just picked up everyone's stuff and you said, I'm gonna fix it. And she's like, your daughter's not like that. She's like, she knows what's hers and she's just coming into the world.
Mm,
So be careful what
mm,
you project onto her. And I was like, oh, that's a good one.
yeah. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, really. I feel like I think we've all done that in a way. I just did a talk on birth trauma last week. So that piece around not
Beautiful.
projecting, not just on our children, but even births we attend or other women, like
Mm,
really, it's each our own job to feel if it was traumatic. And traumatic just means that, the charge is stuck in our bodies. It doesn't even mean it's bad.
mm,
It means that that creative spark, that's really what trauma is. Our life force kind of
mm,
gets clogged up in one way or another. So
mhm.
we have to all be careful about speaking in that way. But to the babies, I think that's definitely true, which is why I'm all for beautiful, undisturbed birth at home. However, I really do respect these souls coming in. They know what they need for their own evolution, for their own path.
Mm,
I think they also know what we need for our healing. So it doesn't always look this very picture perfect way that we think it should. And I think that's relieving for a lot of women, and some stories are really intense. Like I can think of a client I had whose their baby ended up in the NICU for a while, and similar, they had like a channel communicate with the baby while she was in the NICU, and the channel said similar to what you did. She was like, "I'm fine. I'm really
Mm.
interested in observing this other reality right now." And, it wasn't at all what these parents were feeling about their baby being there.
Mm.
So I think there are so many cool ways to think about it, to understand, and maybe to find out as these kids grow with some of these
Mm.
more complicated stories. We can see it in their personalities, but we may also hear from them just
Mm.
why they chose what they did. We don't get complete control, even though it's our body as the vessel. So
Mm.
I think that's a really important point for people listening
Wow.
too. Like, do all the work, like, go for it, eat good food. I love it, but your baby is still a player in this and will choose part of how this needs to happen for you. And, there's just surrender in that ultimately.
Oof, that's beautiful. And you know what came to mind as you said that is like, if I hadn't had this conversation with that woman, I might have subconsciously put her in the victim role and treated her as that for so long, instead of seeing her
Right.
now as this like courageous, like little thing that chose to come in and has this part to play, like you said.
I'm so glad too. And, it's like also spirit babies. Like that's another topic I love. And I love to like share that I don't think they're babies. Like we can say
Mm.
that just for ease of conversation, right? And when they're in our wombs,
Mm.
yeah, they're smaller and we call them babies, but they are highly evolved souls. So it would change the conversation in a lot of ways, right? To consider you're carrying a highly evolved soul,
Yes.
not a helpless baby.
Yeah, this woman, Deborah Kilby, she said it as life before life. That's how she said it. And I was like, wow, that's a whole different take on it. It just opens up to so much more than just thinking about these little babies, like what we all think of a
Yeah.
little baby to be.
Little babies, but where did they come from? How many lives have they lived? What dimension are they coming in from? What like planetary galaxy are they from? Like
Oof, yeah.
it's really cool. Yeah.
I ask my daughter sometimes, like, where did you come from? But now she knows she comes from the womb. Well, she came from me. She's
Through
like,
the
the
womb.
womb, through the womb. She's like, I came. I'm like, okay. But I'm waiting for her to be like, over there. I came from over there.
Yeah, I've totally had some of my kids do that. I've totally had kids that were pre-verbal, like do the pointing in the
Oh,
sky. And yeah, and some of them even verbal have shared. Like my one son, Rune, I remember when he was a baby, he used to tell me that they changed his diapers on a spaceship.
what?
Seriously. And he's
Great.
probably, well, he's definitely from somewhere else. I don't know where. We're still figuring that out. He's 15. Maybe I'll never know, but he's definitely from somewhere else in the way that he is here with life on Earth. It's very apparent that there are differences for him.
Oh,
So
give me
it's interesting
goosebumps.
to support them. It's so cool.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much for sitting with us and sharing all of your wisdom and insights. I would love for you to take this moment to share with the listeners where they can find you and what you are offering right now.
Mm. Taking Back Birth is my podcast. So that's
Mm.
probably the best place to find me on a regular basis. Indiebirth.org is our main indie birth site. We are on Instagram, sort of barely nowadays as Indie Birth Midwifery School. We didn't talk much about the school, but for people that are curious about becoming radical midwives, indiebirthmidwiferyschool.org is the place to go for that. And probably my most recent offering are these somatic sessions. So I've been experimenting with that. And that is indiebirth.org/body. And you can read more about doing a session with me there.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. It's
Yeah,
been
thank
amazing.
you. Thanks for chatting.